Hi, Krista. Welcome to the Genetic Genius Podcast. I'm so excited to have you as a guest today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yay. Okay, before we dive in and talk all about TRE, which is going to be so awesome, first, I'd love for you to just talk about yourself, your background, and just a little bit about your story so the listeners can get to know you a little bit before we dive in.
Sure. So I will try to make this short, but my story is that I had a history of dealing with really chronic anxiety and panic attacks.
Mm,
So the first time I had a panic attack, I was 12 years old, and they would continue fast and furious for almost 2 decades. And
wow.
I had done all the things that you're supposed to do to sort of help that and make that better and deal with the anxiety. And I found some things that were helpful and made a difference, but nothing really changed things as much as I wanted. And I was
Mm,
still suffering and I was still experiencing panic attacks regularly.
mm-hmm.
And I got to this point where I was super frustrated and fed up. And I had been doing talk therapy, which is one of the things that I had been trying on my journey of trying to heal this.
Mm-hmm.
I actually remember saying to my husband at the time, I don't feel like I have anything left to talk about. I don't feel like this is in my head. Like I go to therapy each week and I don't know what to say, but I'm still having these issues. And
Mm,
so I had this realization that if it wasn't in my head, then it must be in my body. And I
mm,
hadn't been including my body in the conversation of healing. And it hit me. And of course, hindsight is 2020. And looking back on it, it's like it all made sense that that's exactly
right.
what needed to happen, because anyone that's experienced panic attacks before, or even just feelings of anxiety, that it is such a physical expression, right? You
Mm-hmm.
feel it in your body. And so it just makes sense that you would need to include that in your approach to making yourself feel better, right? So
Mm-hmm.
in that, I kind of came to this place of surrender and sort of like said to the universe, like, all right, I know I need to work with my body. I don't know what that's going to look like though, so you got to help me out. And just like things in life have a way of doing, I came across exactly what I needed, which was TRE.
Mm-hmm.
And that changed my life. And, we're going to talk about what that is, but I'll
Right.
just leave it there that
Mysterious word.
yes, this unhelpful word TRE, but I've discovered that and it changed my life and it completely eliminated my panic attacks.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
such a profound story. It's so true how it's not just connected. People think, oh, I have a physical problem or I have an emotional problem. It's all connected.
Mhm.
We're not a separate being, even though we like to compartmentalize.
Well, that's just it. That was the word I was just going to use. Is that's exactly what we do. We have this reductionist view of things and
Hmm.
we do compartmentalize, which is helpful sometimes,
Right. Yeah. We need to
right?
like, okay, look at this particular thing. We can put it on the shelf and examine it.
Right. I sort of joke like if you sprain your knee, you don't want to go to the cardiologist, right? You want to go
Right.
to PT. But when you're having these things, sometimes we need to treat the whole, not sometimes, oftentimes, most of the time, we need to treat the whole person. And I feel like we don't do that enough. So I hope that that starts to change.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we're seeing a big shift with that. Okay, super. So let's talk about TRE. But first, I'd like to discuss let's like go back a little bit and talk about trauma and the importance of kind of like what trauma is and the importance of self-care. Because I'd like, trauma has such a I know it's such an interesting word because people think when they think trauma, they think ER. Like, and it has a lot more connotation to it. And I'd love for you to kind of like touch base on that for our listeners. Like, what does trauma mean to you? And what do you see trauma existing like in the practice that you have with your clients?
Sure, that's a great question and a great place to start. So, I mean, really, trauma in its sort of simplest definition is anything that overwhelms your system's capacity to cope with it, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
is one of those definitions that's rather unhelpful because really, like, what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, let me give you a really perfect example from my herb garden. Actually, this is a really nice metaphor of how that actually works in our systems. So, this was, several weeks ago. I was out in the garden with my son, and we were inspecting some frost damage. We'd had
Mm.
a really bad frost the night before, and I had neglected to cover the herbs.
Uh-oh.
And so we're out there and I'm looking at the damage, and the basil and the parsley are right next to each other, and the basil is done. It's
Right.
toast, right? It's
That does
completely
not like
brown.
frost.
No, it's done. It completely killed the basil. The parsley, however, which was right next to it, had the exact same conditions as the basil, looked better than ever. It was actually like a better color. It smelled great, right? It was completely healthy and thriving. And
Mhm.
in that same way, that frost is sort of metaphorical for the way that different experiences can land in different people's systems and affect them to either collapse them, like in
Mhm.
the case of the basil, and cause destruction and harm, or for some people it can actually, we can have such thing as like post-traumatic growth, like the parsley,
Right.
right? And we can actually be enhanced isn't the right word, but we can be strengthened by the things that we've experienced. And so trauma is sort of exactly the same way,
Mhm.
right? What happens in your life, if it were to happen in my life, it would land in each of our bodies very differently because we have different window of tolerances. We have different capacities for handling stress. We have different levels of resiliency. And so trauma, like you said, it can be sort of big T trauma. So this is where you have to go to the emergency room. It's also
Mhm.
things like war or genocide or famine, right? Those types of things that anyone could easily identify as trauma. But then there's other things. There's things like the trauma of living in modern society.
Mhm.
There's
2020.
well, and then I was going to say, and then there's the trauma of living through a pandemic, right? But
Right, yeah.
even before that, life in general is really not kind on our nervous system. And our nervous system has adapted to have a really elegant stress response.
Mhm.
But modern life has outpaced that evolution. And so things that you don't think of as being stressful or traumatic really can start to be, right? And they
Mm.
especially can be when we don't give ourselves ample time to recover from them and have
Mhm.
downtime and rest. And I think one thing that people have learned in 2020 is just how busy our lives were
Yeah.
before all of this. When all of a sudden we found ourselves with so much time on our hands, it was
Mhm.
this stark contrast of what our lives were like before, really showing us the places where maybe we needed to slow down a little bit. Right. And so trauma can just be having a hectic job. It can be parenting and trying to, well, just parenting in general, right? Parenting without a
Right.
village and without a
Right.
community. It can be
Mm.
things like trying to work from home and getting your kids on virtual learning every day, right? It's these
Mhm.
little things that over time can really start to wreak havoc on our systems and in a physical capacity and also in a mental emotional one.
Yeah. Oh, great. I loved the plant analogy as I'm a super plant lover.
Oh, great. Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was wonderful. And it's so true. We each have our own reaction, which I think is part of how we have that resiliency. We bounce back. But then, like you said, it's like the onion, like sometimes the trauma can accumulate over time and we don't notice, or we
Mhm.
have little stressors and our sympathetic nervous system just kind of gets overloaded over time and then we just like tune out. There's
Yeah.
all different ways we have the response. So great. Okay, so that sounds really amazing. We've established this trauma definition, which I would say trauma has probably been on a lot of people's minds this year,
Mhm.
because they've been experiencing in different ways, which is one of the reasons why I thought it would be great for us to talk about it today. And now let's talk about the TRE picture, what that is, and then how that relates to the work that you do empowering mothers.
Sure. So TRE is actually an acronym and it stands for tension and trauma releasing exercises.
Mm-hmm.
And so I alluded to this earlier, but it's physical exercises, right? So it's things that we're doing with the body.
Mm.
It's a series of exercises that we do to initiate a natural shaking mechanism in the
Mm-hmm.
body.
Mm-hmm.
And what's actually really fascinating about the shaking mechanism in the TRE world, we call it tremoring.
Mm-hmm.
But that shaking or tremor mechanism is actually part of your mammalian nervous system. So all
Mm,
mammals have this capacity. And what it is it's one of the ways that your nervous system has to be able to complete a stress cycle,
mm-hmm,
right? So
mm-hmm.
most of us are familiar with the term fight or flight.
Right.
Right. And so we know what that feels like in our body, right? It's this rush and surge of survival hormones, adrenaline
Mm-hmm.
and cortisol coursing through our body. And those things are incredibly, um, they're incredibly, what's the word I'm looking for? Necessary, right? We want those.
Right. Yeah.
Because if
We
we're
want
in
to
a
run from the
situation,
bear or the lion or whatever
exactly.
it is.
Yeah, we want to be prepared. It takes a lot of, energy to be able to fight or to
Mm-hmm.
flight and run away. And so we
Right.
need this big surge in our bodies for that to happen. And that's great. That's what we want to occur. The issue is if we don't actually end up fighting or we don't actually end up flighting, we still have those hormones coursing through our body.
Right.
And so we need to do something to sort of use those up and discharge them out
Mm-hmm.
of our body.
Mm.
And so one of the ways that our nervous system has built into it is this capacity to shake. And in doing that, it uses up those survival hormones so that you can
Mm-hmm.
come back to a place of regulation and sort of, be back in homeostasis, if you will, right?
Right. Neutral.
Yeah, neutral, back into this like window of feeling safe in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And the issue is that most of us are in these situations where we're chronically activating our nervous system, but we're not actually doing those things. We're not fighting, we're not flighting. And then we have this beautiful capacity to shake, and we learn to inhibit that, right? So
Mm-hmm.
at a very young age, we start learning that shaking equates to fear.
Right.
It shows weakness. It's a sign of vulnerability. And we're taught that those things are not valued and that they're looked down in our society. And so we stop
Mm.
doing it.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so what we can do with TRE is we can tap back into that mechanism. So we can move the body in such a way that we can elicit that natural shaking and
Mm.
use it to help complete these cycles that our body has been wanting from us, right? And asking
Right.
for us that we just haven't been paying attention to.
The natural release that we needed.
Yes.
And so it's a series of specific exercises. It's always the same kind of series, or are there different ones specific to what you have going on?
No, so it's the same set of exercises that you
Mm-hmm.
do regardless of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
I actually am also a yoga instructor. And so
Mm-hmm.
in my practice, I put those exercises together as a yoga flow
Oh, nice.
instead. So I actually kind of put them together. For me, they're sort of a natural marriage and work
Mm-hmm.
really well in partnership with one another.
Mm-hmm.
So that being said, I mix it up a little bit, but essentially you're doing the same thing regardless of what we're trying to treat or work on.
Right. So everyone that would be doing the same type of
Yes.
series, so to speak, or
Yes.
exercise series. And how many are there in the series that you learned or that you teach others?
So it's 7 exercises.
Mm-hmm.
6 are sort of warm-up exercises, and then the 7th, which is the one where you actually start shaking usually,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
is sort of a set in and of itself. It's a
Mm.
mini series that you do on the
Right.
floor
Yeah.
to start the shaking.
Oh, it's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you're doing these set of exercises, then your sympathetic nervous system is triggered to release. And it's a physical release, and also it sounds like an emotional release as well.
Yeah, the thing is though, you're not always experiencing it as a sympathetic activation, like while you're actually
Right. It could be a
practicing.
parasympathetic release.
Yeah. So, and what's important about that is that you don't have to it's not necessarily activating. It
Mm-hmm.
can be for some people, and it really depends, everybody reacts a little bit differently.
Right.
But like you mentioned, it is also an emotional release. And this is one of the reasons that it's encouraged that you work with someone like myself, who's a certified provider, because
Mm-hmm.
when you are starting to unwind and release some of these things that have been held in your body for a while, including some of this emotional stuff, you really want to be able to move through that slowly and in a container of safety, right? Which is what
Right.
we provide. And then
Yeah.
expert guidance on how to sort of navigate through that, because you can overwhelm yourself, right? So this isn't
Right.
the kind of thing that you just want to like start doing on your own and just get all gung ho about. You really want to approach it with caution. But that being said, it is perfectly safe for most people.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So it sounds like you can learn the exercises easily, and then it's better or encouraged to work with a practitioner like yourself so that you're guided to help the release in a safe environment, meaning that your body could be overloaded with release all at once. Yes.
Exactly.
So like a little tiny trickle of release over time.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what I tell clients is my goal is for you to not need me.
Yeah,
Right. So
right.
we
Yeah.
work together. I teach you the sequence. I teach you how to shake and what to do to get tremoring going. And then we work on some self-regulation skills that go along with that so that you can
Mhm.
then eventually go off and practice on your own in a safe way.
Right. And I think that's the goal for all health providers and practitioners. We want people to be able to be on their own and be able to do stuff on their own. That's my goal. I want to be, I don't want to see you forever.
Right.
I want you to be like off like a little flower in the wind, enjoying life.
Exactly.
Yeah. But sometimes it takes a shift, and that sounds like that's part of the process.
Hmm.
And then so your kind of like niche or your love of category that you like to help is women, and can you talk about like the process of how you discovered that working with women and especially mothers, the emotional connection there, and how you discovered that and working with that particular population has helped you to grow yourself.
Yeah, so this one, it was just sort of a natural evolution in my own life, right? So
Hmm.
I work with a group of women I call radical mothers,
Hmm.
and they're the ones that sort of know deep down in their bones that they need to do the work that no one else before them in their family line has been able to do. That if they
Right.
want to give their kids a better life, they actually have to give themselves a better life first so
Hmm.
that they can model and role model that to their children. And so I kind of came to that place in my own life. Actually, before I became a mother, I started realizing that some of the things that I was dealing with in my life
Hmm.
were a result of this generational inherited trauma.
Hmm.
And I saw the toll that that had on my parents and in my grandparents' lives. And I knew before becoming a mother that I was not willing to enter into motherhood repeating that pattern.
Hmm.
And
Right.
I was fortunate enough to have that insight before I chose to become a mother so that I could really do the work that it took to
Mhm.
root some of that stuff out of my own body and out of my family story so
Right.
that I could then enter into motherhood from this different place than anyone else before me had.
Yeah, rewriting your family story or your health story can be so powerful.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. And so that's, that became the women that and the people that I was called to serve.
Right.
Because for me, on that journey of healing with this greater goal in mind, it felt incredibly isolating and it was really lonely work.
Mm-hmm.
And then I became a mother, and the loneliness and the isolation and those feelings continued. And I
Mm.
just had this nagging feeling that this wasn't the way that it was supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, this is not how we're supposed to be doing this.
Right.
And I'm the kind of person who, when I can't stand something, I just have to work towards changing it.
I have to change it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need people like you.
Right. So,
Yeah.
it's like, God willing, I will change this modern mothering paradigm to one where we're actually supported, because mothers rule the world, right? And when we heal,
Yeah.
the world heals, because that's just it, is that when we start to use tools like TRE
Mm-hmm.
to start to heal trauma in ourselves, it affects not only ourselves, but also the people around us. It doesn't
Right.
just benefit us, it benefits literally everyone that we come into contact. And so when you start multiplying that out we can really change the world by changing ourselves and doing this work, which is why I'm so excited to share it with people.
Yeah, so true. It's when we become a mirror for those around us when we're changing. And that is like revolutionary, right? When we can make that huge shift. And it sounds like we'll talk a little bit more too about the community aspect of it. And which is, I think, a big part of how we're shifting into healing right now and healing on the planet, because we've gotten so virtual.
Mhm.
And one aspect has been really great, I think, because it's created this whole other aspect of healing, on and we don't, people are realizing, well, I don't have to be physically in the space, right? And I think that is one of the most profound things I've seen with this year, is that like, oh, I can still experience this profound level of healing. And even if it's with a group of people, it's so much more amazing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's connected us to opportunities that we wouldn't have had before too, right?
Right.
So I
Mm-hmm.
now am working with clients that are all over the country and all over Canada.
Right.
And I would not have been doing that if I hadn't been pushed online and onto Zoom like everyone else in the
Right.
world.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. We're like, okay, here you go.
Yeah,
Whether you like it or not, you're going to be on camera.
exactly.
Okay. And so as women, what do you think so I was just thinking about this before our call today about like the pattern, like, and you were talking about that family lineage of pattern. And what do you think of that, like, repeated pattern is about, if that's clear, like, and like that kind of holds us back as women from, I think, that complete healing process. And so have you seen a pattern? I'll be really clear about the question. Have you seen a pattern in the women that you've been working with in kind of like the same repeated stuck pattern, or does everybody kind of have that, different patterns of trauma? Or does it seem like we're, as a society, having a similar area of stuckness that is shifting now as we're moving through different things?
I think that the similarity has been the women that I work with have come from situations where they didn't get the tools and resources that they've
Mm,
started realizing actually are important.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And they're starting to understand this idea that, our kids learn as much from watching us as they do from anything that we say to them. I think they actually learn more from watching than listening.
Right.
And, I think the women that I work with have come to this sort of realization that if they want their kids to matter, if they want their kids to have and respect boundaries, if they want them to model practicing self-care in their life or valuing themselves or loving themselves,
Mm,
then they have to model that
mm-hmm.
through that behavior on their own. And they don't have a template they have not seen that in their own lives from the people from their parents, from the women that they're friends with, from the other moms in the mommy group, right? Because that's not our sort of paradigm right now.
Mm-hmm.
But they all come to this place of realizing that something needs to give and that it needs to be them, and that they actually need to center themselves in their family rather
Mm,
than continue to play on the outskirts, right? It's about
mm-hmm.
more than just eating the scraps off your kid's plate day
Mm,
after day after day.
right.
It's actually about being able to meet your needs to then show up as a better mother.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we're finally, some of us are starting to see that and work towards that and starting to shift these ideas of things like self-care being selfish.
Right.
Right. But all of these women have not seen this themselves. And so they know that they don't want to parent like their mother did, but they're not
Mm-hmm.
sure what they need to do instead.
Right.
That's sort of where I, meet up with them in their lives on this
Mm-hmm.
journey, is they know something needs to give. And then I'm there to help say, okay, this is what we can do.
Right. This
I
is
can
what we
help
can shift.
facilitate that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so true and profound. And just as a little like backtrack to the trauma piece, I was just thinking, now I don't know, this might be a little bit out of your box, but maybe I can formulate it a little bit better. So from the trauma piece, how do you think that trauma gets held in the cell, like at the DNA level? Because we're talking about releasing trauma from the physical body and the emotional body. And so can you envision, or can you give your thoughts and opinions about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it gets held in a couple of different ways. I think it gets held on an epigenetic level, right? And we know
Mm-hmm.
this from research that
Mm-hmm.
trauma actually changes gene expression, and we
Mm-hmm.
see that gene expression change in generations down from even the people that initially experienced the trauma.
Right.
I think when you start multiplying that out times generations and lots of trauma in the world, it starts to
Mm-hmm.
make sense where some of that stuff comes from.
Yeah,
So
super
I think,
like mutated down the line.
yeah, I think
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the ways that it gets passed down. I think another way is on sort of an energetic level,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I don't think that we're just purely physical bodies. We are
No.
also energetic beings,
Right, definitely.
right? And those things change. It's sort of, it reminds me of like how we can see, we think of emotions as being this thing that are, not physical and sort of,
Mm-hmm.
like loosely
Etheric.
defined. Yeah,
Yeah.
ethereal, right? And the reality is we can actually measure them. We can
Right.
measure different emotional
Yeah.
responses in the body
Mm-hmm.
using imagery and see
Mm-hmm.
how angry represents differently than sadness or represents
Right.
differently than joy, right? And so they
Mm-hmm.
have these sort of energetic impressions start to change things,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
So there's that component of how things are sort of passed down. And then there's also this idea of like how things are modeled to us and attachment styles. And I think that
Mhm.
that plays a role in things largely as well.
Right.
Right? So if you had unavailable primary caregivers and you did not form secure attachments as a child,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
then you are less likely to be able to offer secure attachments to your own children.
Right.
Right. And this isn't
Mhm.
destiny. This is just like speaking very broadly. But
Right. Yeah. Everything is changeable, everybody
yeah,
that's listening. Right.
exactly. Right.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. But it takes awareness to
Yes.
change those things.
Yeah, exactly.
But when you have that awareness, then you can have alteration. I'm always saying alteration follows awareness. So when you
Right.
become aware, I didn't
Exactly.
have a healthy attachment. So
Mm-hmm.
now I have to work to be able to provide that for my son.
Right.
All the ways that that was not established for me, I can start to understand. I can see how that has affected my life. And then I can understand what I need to shift in my mothering style versus my own mother's to
Mm-hmm.
my child. Right.
Right. Yeah.
But when those things go unexamined, generation after generation after generation, it wreaks havoc on everyone, right?
Right.
Starts to cause damage and destruction to the people that are living in those situations.
Right, like the Tasmanian devil from the cartoon, right?
Totally.
Like running around.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. I liked what you were talking about. I always think of it like a stamp when we have like different things that come into the body, that have imprinted over time, and that can be
Mhm.
from like a physical aspect. It's like an easy way, kind of, for people to understand, like the DNA, and it's so interesting from that emotional standpoint, because I almost think that has a much, much bigger stamp than when we're talking about the trauma piece, through our line and lineage, as you were talking about, and the studies have shown that where you can go back 6 generations and see it's way more than that, but that's how far they've been able to study so far on the most recent data. But if we think, okay, so what was happening 6 generations ago, that's a long time in your family history, and there
Mhm.
was a lot of stuff happening on the planet, so of course that emotional stamp is going to be imprinted on your DNA, just like a pharmaceutical imprints on your DNA. And people are like, oh, wow. So then we have to figure out how to move it and shift it. And it sounds like TRE is a great way to do that.
Mhm. Yeah, it absolutely is.
Mm-hmm.
It's because it is moving that stuff through your system, right? And it's sort of
Mm-hmm.
allowing a new program, if you will, to operate in your system, in your body.
Right.
Right. I sort of think of it like a snow globe,
Mm-hmm.
where if the snow on the little village has settled in a certain pattern and
Mm-hmm.
snow around, you got to shake it up. The water gets a little cloudy and then it resettles in a new pattern. And it's
Right.
possible to move the snow, but sometimes you need something to come in and shake it.
Right. Shake
Right.
things up a little bit. Right. Totally. Okay. So, what do you think like holds us back from breaking free and breaking the pattern and shaking things up?
Well, that's a good question. I think there's a lot of things. I think for a lot of people, it's that they're completely unself-aware.
Mm-hmm.
I think a
Right.
lot of people just exist in these patterns. And I don't say that in a judgmental way. It
Right.
makes sense because most people are living in a survival response, right?
Yeah.
They're not living in, because they've experienced these things, they're in a place of activation in their nervous system more often than not. And so they are just doing what they can to make it through the day, and thinking about patterns of, generational trauma is not first and foremost on their mind.
When they wake up in the morning, they're like, oh, what was my family trauma like?
Right, exactly. How can I heal 6 generations of trauma that I now have the burden of carrying, right? Because they're in survival mode. And so I think that for a lot of people, they're just kind of like head down trying to make it through the day.
Right.
And then for the people who maybe have an inkling of what's going on and have a little bit of a nudge to want to do something about it, I think that people don't always know where to turn or how to get started.
Right. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Because this isn't the kind of thing, I feel like now the tide is turning a little bit. We're starting to have these conversations on a cultural, larger scale level. But generally speaking, it isn't like what you talk about at the dinner table. Like, so how are you going to heal your trauma? You know what I mean? Like, these are the kinds of things that are, it's like, I feel like just therapy in general has finally started to be like accepted as something that, people can go and do, and it isn't taboo anymore the way
Right.
that
Or
it was.
frowned upon.
Right. And sort of shamed the way it was even
Right.
I can remember in my own lifetime. And I think that trauma healing and finding tools and resources that really work is kind of that next like shift that we need to make, so that those people who are ready are connected with what they need to be able to do that work. But I think the resistance sometimes comes from just a feeling of overwhelm and not knowing what to do.
Right. Like having the resources and the tools that you first, it sounds like you need to know what's going on or want to make the shift, and then having those resources available. And then, so when so we're talking about breaking free from the trauma, realizing the trauma is there, having the tools and finding, I think, different aspects like TRE and different avenues like in the community. So how does our family play a role in like the unwillingness to shift out of that place of trauma, that held trauma?
Well, I think it depends on the family dynamics a little bit, but oftentimes if your family has created a situation which was intentionally or not, but nonetheless traumatic, and they haven't done this work themselves, they're not necessarily keen to have somebody come along and sort of rock the boat, if you will.
Right. Yeah,
Right?
that makes sense.
So, and that's why in my experience, this was lonely, isolating work, because it's not like I was being embraced and celebrated in my family when I started off doing this. I was seen as like the bad child who was cutting my parents off. That's since changed as I've gone along in my healing path. But in the beginning, in order to make some of those big jumps, I had to set boundaries, and that kind of stuff isn't support. When you're the person on the outside of the fence, you're not usually the one cheering on the person that put the fence up.
Right. Yeah, that
Right.
makes total sense. Yeah. So being aware, I think, is a key part of what you were just saying there, that you might be shifting and stirring up things, so to speak, in yourself as you're making that shift, which is great, but also in your family, if you're working with your family trauma.
Right. Because it's been the status quo that we as a family do it this way.
Right.
And then you come along and say, actually, I'm not playing that game.
Right. Yeah. Especially if it's been a repeated pattern that you're recognizing and that someone else isn't able to recognize themselves. Yeah. That can totally stir things up. Yeah. And so when women are, that you're working with and you work specifically with women.
I don't only work with women, but I mostly work with women.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
When you're working with clients, more specifically women, how does TRE help you get to the deeper level of healing? Like, because I think a lot of there's so many different levels of healing work out there that not that are superficial, but that I think Some can be, and or maybe it's just the receptivity can be a little bit more shallow or superficial. So how does TRE help to access the deeper level of healing?
Well, because it's literally working on the deeper parts of your brain. So it's working on the subconscious survival brain.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And what's so brilliant about it too, is that working with the body. So let's just for a moment break them down. So you have
Right.
your brain and your body, and they're both experiencing symptoms. You're having anxiety, and then you're having, let's say, panic attacks
Right.
in your body. If you want to change one to affect the other, you can work in what we call a top-down model, which is where things like therapy come into play, where you go in and you work with a therapist and you talk about what's going on.
Right.
And you're using your brain to try to affect how your body feels. And the other option is that you can work with your body to affect how your brain is, right? This is a bottom-up approach.
Yeah.
And if you look at the way that we're actually neurophysiologically designed, right? And you look at the vagus nerve, which is a primary component of our stress response, the way that the vagus nerve is actually existing in your body is that more of the information runs in the direction of body to brain than brain to body. So when you work with the body, it's like if you have the option of taking an 8-lane highway or a 1 or 2-lane highway,
right.
which one's going to get you there faster, right? The 8-lane highway has more options to go than the 2-lane highway.
Yeah.
When you work with the body to affect the brain, it's working smarter, not harder.
So it opens up more pathways of healing, more pathways of communication. So all the cells can then shift and change at a more speedier pace.
Exactly. And the thing too is that within your brain, we can sort of break it down into your sort of upper level, higher cognitive thinking brain versus your sort of lower level reptilian survival subconscious brain.
Yeah, your caveman brain.
Right. And the thing is that caveman brain
or cavewoman.
Yeah. Your cave person brain.
Cave person, yeah.
sits guard of all the information that comes in from your body. So everything that you perceive and percept in your body about your environment has to actually get filtered through that survival brain before the information makes it up to your thinking brain.
Right.
And so obviously all of these parts communicate with one another. But if you want to get the message there quicker and you want to sort of speak the language of the survival brain, use the body. And it's a better form of communication than trying to think your way out of feeling bad. Like the last time, I don't know, the last time you felt like anxious and you just tried thinking your way out of it. It's a lot harder, but if you go for a run or have a dance party or move your body or call a girlfriend, right, and rely on some of these things that work on these different levels, it works better.
Right. Yeah, it makes so much sense. It's like the ego is taken out of the equation.
Totally.
Because that's a big part. When the ego is running the ship or driving the car, that's not a good idea.
Right. And that's actually one of the things I say a lot when I'm working with clients is we just need to get out of our own way. Our body knows what it needs to do. Our body wants to heal. It wants to be in a place of regulation. And we are the ones that screw that up for ourselves. We come in and say, wait a minute, what's going on? And it makes sense because our body is wired to detect new things as potentially scary, and it's trying to protect us, which is what we want it to do. But when we can, again, have awareness and understand those things, then we can say, okay, thinking brain, this is what we're doing. We're going to practice TRE. And I know it's a little different. And I know it's a little weird. And, I'm going to shake and move my body, but I'm going to let that happen. And when we do, again, the body it wants to heal.
Right. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's our innate ability, and it's within every cell of our being to be the best that we can be.
Exactly.
We just like you said, put up our own roadblocks to healing.
Right.
And so so TRE is helping to break this, like I like to call it the trauma loop that we get ourselves wrapped up in and with the body and the brain. So it sounds like that then TRE can open the door to this new place of self-care, which I think is one of your, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of your main foci with with your clients is really helping them to realize this amazing possibility of change that can happen when self-care is the primary focus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you're absolutely right. Excuse me. So what I work on with clients is something I call dynamic self-care,
Mm-hmm.
which self-care is one of those words that I have a love-hate relationship with because I think it's amazing and it's also been so diluted. And
Right.
so I use this term that I've coined dynamic self-care to differentiate it from Pinterest style self-care, right? So that's the stuff that like looks nice and feels nice, like a pedicure with girlfriends, but it isn't really caring. It's what is that doing to actually change
Mm-hmm.
how you show up in the world, right? How is that caring for yourself on a deep and dynamic level? And the
Right.
answer is usually it's not. Not that it can't potentially be a part of this, but at face value, it's not doing anything for you. It might feel good in the moment, and there's value to that.
Right.
But I'm talking about the kind of stuff that's so the three pillars of dynamic self-care are self-awareness,
Mm-hmm.
self-love,
Mm-hmm.
and self-compassion.
Mm.
And
Totally.
I see those three things sort of like a Venn diagram where they overlap and they're interconnected. And you can't have one without the others, right? They're all interdependent upon one, but you can sort of enter into a practice of dynamic self-care starting with any of those three.
Right.
And
Yeah.
when you do that, so one of my favorite things to teach to clients is something I call nervous system literacy,
Mm-hmm.
which is some of this stuff like we've been talking about, like understanding the way your vagus nerve operates, understanding
Yeah.
how your survival brain works, understanding the communication between your brain and your body and different, states of the nervous system and the
Mm-hmm.
polyvagal theory, right? And all of these sorts of things, because I see them as a gateway to dynamic self-care.
Mm-hmm.
So when we can start to leverage these things in our lives can start to be transformed by them, right?
Right.
So let me give you an example of how I actually put this into practice in my life the other day.
Mm-hmm.
So I have an incredible kid. I love him dearly. He does not sleep. He is a terrible sleeper. He has been for all 2 years of his life, and I am pretty tired.
Oh.
And I get through it most days, but then some days we have a really bad stretch and I'm just
Yeah.
exhausted. Okay. And this
Oh.
was me recently. And I realized throughout the day that I felt awful and I was in an activated state because I wasn't rested. And for me,
Right.
when I don't get enough, and not just me, but anyone, when you don't get enough rest, you're
Right.
more likely to be dysregulated.
Yeah. Get cranky and all kinds of stuff.
Right. And so I started realizing though, I was practicing self-awareness that
Mm-hmm.
everything felt awful. I started worrying about money. I started worrying about an email I needed to write. I started worrying about my kid who was drawing on the wall, like all these things
Mm-hmm.
that didn't matter in the moment, that really weren't life or death issues, were all of a sudden all running through my head and
Yeah.
everything felt terrible. The entire day felt overwhelming and I felt bad about myself. And I started beating myself up about all of these things that were ultimately out of my control.
Right.
And then I said, wait a minute, this is what's happening, right? I used this self-awareness tool and I said, oh, I'm so tired and my nervous system is just running on hot flames right now. And that's why everything feels overwhelming. It's
Mm-hmm.
actually not overwhelming. And all of these things can wait. And I'm just going to practice grace and allowing myself some love and compassion that I don't feel great today because I'm tired. And that's why everything feels bad. And as soon as I did that, it shifted everything, right? That one piece of knowing what was happening shifted things. So I actually wrote about this in my Facebook group that I have for
Mm-hmm.
radical mothers. And I
Mm-hmm.
said, would a bubble bath feel, I sort of told them about my day and I said, would a bubble bath feel great today? It would, but honestly, I'm too tired to take the toys out of the tub and I would still be beating myself up while I was in it unless I practiced this kind of dynamic self-care, which is different, right? So that sort of distinguishes how we can use this to actually care for ourselves because these subconscious thoughts, when we can bring light to them, they have so much power, right? Our inner dialogue is incredibly important. Talk about
Mm.
emotional imprints.
Right.
Our dialogue can leave imprints on our system as well. And we
Oh,
have to be
totally.
really mindful of that. And this is one of those ways that we can put that into action for ourselves.
Yeah, we a lot of times we're our biggest self-critic. Right. And I love
Mhm.
that piece of that Venn diagram, that, that self-awareness piece, is so key to shifting everything. And we, as women especially, get so caught up in, doing, that we just never take a breath, be like, okay, a check-in, a self-check-in. How's it
Mhm.
going? What's really going on? And like you said, what's really happening in the moment, which is causing everything else to snowball into this, like,
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
mhm,
How can we take that self check-in and sort of reset, right? How can we
right,
allow ourselves that pause because we're not good at doing that?
right,
And when we're in an activated state, our body really doesn't want us to do that. It's not our natural
right.
inclination because we've got this stuff running through our body. It wants to fight. It doesn't want to relax and look and think about our lives. It wants to kick a hole in the wall.
Right, yeah, totally. Yeah, and when we're the society that we're in now, where everything is so instantaneous and fast paced, it's almost like it's harder, I feel like, to have that moment of, introspection, or that breath where you just take, like, okay, I'm gonna just take a moment.
Mm,
Everybody out there, like, taking a moment to be me and to tune out, and that's why I personally love meditation so much, is that it allows me to have the inner space. And I know my day is so different when I don't do that.
mhm.
And I start my day every day with meditation. And if I'm like, something happens, and, life happens, and I don't get to it that day, like, I just feel so different,
Mm,
and then I don't really think about it till later. It's like, what happened today? Like,
right.
oh yeah, I didn't, didn't tune
I
into
missed that.
yeah, that special moment in time when me need it was needed.
Right.
um, so in the aspect of TRE, it's a very part of it is very physical. Do you is it are you doing virtual lessons now with your clients, where you can teach them how to do everything like on the Zoom video?
Yes, I am. So I work with clients privately. I do
Mhm.
private instruction, and then I also do group work. So I actually just finished a group this week that had
Mhm.
been meeting for 4 weeks. I sort of do a 4 week intro series that I run
Yeah,
that puts TRE and yoga together. And
nice.
so I just wrapped that, but I'll be offering that again in the future. And then I work just solo with clients, all via Zoom.
All via Zoom.
Yep.
They're zoomed in. That's great. That's a good segue. Like to talk a little bit more about the Facebook group, the Radical Mother Village. That's correct, right?
Yes.
And I love that name, and I'd love to talk about just kind of the aspect of, why you created it, and then what you've seen shift in having this healing community that you've created, and the radical shift the mothers are making.
Yeah, so like all the things in my life, when I can't find them for myself, I realize that I have to build it on my own, and
Right,
this was no
create
exception,
it.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I joke that this is my virtual village that I am the mayor of. And the idea was that I wanted a place for women to be able to come together and gather to share and support and inspiration and empowerment and find connection and realize that we are not alone in doing this
Mhm.
work.
Mhm.
Realize that there are lots of different ways that we can help ourselves do these things, right? So I one of the things in the group that's super important to me is that it is like a village. And in
Mhm.
a village, it's not just a single voice that's talking, right? It's a
Right.
chorus of voices. And so I do a weekly interview series where I bring other radical mothers in who offer different healing strategies than what I do, or share their stories of being a radical mother, right? Because I really
Mm.
want this to be a place where mothers and women can come to connect to something that's going to help them, right? So obviously I offer services. I offer the dynamic self-care coaching and the TRE, but that's not the right fit for everyone, and not everyone is ready for that, right? But that doesn't mean that they don't need something for
Mhm.
healing. And so I really see this virtual village as a place that they can come and gather in community, albeit virtually, and find some of those things that they need. And sometimes it's just a
Mhm.
sympathetic ear from the rest of the group to say, hey, I'm facing this thing. Am I alone? And then, of course, people chime in and say, no, you're not alone.
Right. Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. It's so important for us to have, especially as women, to have a place where we can express and voice how we're doing and offload the day. And I really like how you bring in people, the radical women, to talk about their own healing methods or how they do need, or how they need healing. I think is that part of it too.
Yeah, and just hearing their story, right?
Right, hearing
Because
their
my
story.
story is just one representation of
Right.
how mothers come to radical mothering or how they come to healing, but it's certainly not the only one. And so by bringing in other people, right? Because I think that one of our core human needs is validation. And sometimes we just need someone else to say, that was the same for me too.
Right. Yeah.
And so by bringing in other women, I have the opportunity to connect that experience to more people than outside of the ones that can connect with what my experience was.
Right. Yeah. Like you're not alone.
Exactly.
Yeah. Which sometimes we just need to hear that, in our, especially now in the comforting place that we are in the planet,
Right.
reaching out and learning that like, hey, Joe Smith or Juliet Smith
Yeah.
down the road is experiencing the same thing as me, even if they're 1,000 miles away. Which I think is so important, as you said earlier. Shifting and healing women and everyone helps the planet to shift, which I think we're seeing that in such profound levels this year.
Yeah, exactly. Right. We heal in community. We are
Right.
social creatures, and we need that now more than ever, at a time when we're getting it less than ever, and in person, right? In real life. And so I was called to create this. So
Kudos. Yeah,
feel
it's
fully.
great. Love it.
Thank
Yeah. And
you.
people can find it on Facebook, and it's called the Radical Mother Village, and they can ask to join.
Yes. Yep.
Yes. Okay,
Exactly.
perfect. And then let's talk about your awesome free resource, the Ultimate Reset List. What is that? And why should everybody go to your website and download it?
Yeah. So this was a free resource that I put together as just a reference guide for those times when you just know you need something to reset your nervous. You need to hit that reset button, right?
Right.
And so I've sort of arranged them by the amount of time that you have to be able to do them. So I have options for like things that you can do in the moment. So in the moment of being stuck in traffic, or in the moment of your toddler having a meltdown on the kitchen floor again while you're trying to cook dinner, these are things you can do to help your nervous system. Things you can do when you have a couple of minutes, things you can do when you have 15 minutes all to yourself, right? I've sort of arranged them like that because everything that I do, I try to make mom friendly so that they can actually implement in their lives, because I know for me, if it's not mom friendly, it doesn't get done. Right.
Right.
So that's sort of what it is. And what's great about it is all of these ideas and suggestions are rooted in neuroscience to really work with the way that you are wired to
Right.
be effective and fast and work with your system. I again, the mom friendly way of doing things is working smarter, not harder. And for me, that means working with the body. So everything that I offer has that sort of neuroscience backed flavor to it, because I love geeking out on this stuff, and because I've seen the power of how effective it is in my own life. So
yeah, well, our brain is a powerful machine, right? And it's, or organ, I guess is a better word. And the neurotransmitters are just mind blowing in their ability to shift things, and they're easily turned on and turned off by specific things we can do, whether that's physically or emotionally, and like you said, in the moment. Right. And we can have a surge of serotonin or dopamine just by eating a potato chip.
Right.
So, our brain is able, like you were talking about earlier, able to sense our environment so quickly and make a shift in the nervous system. And it's so easy for us to do that when we are given the tools. So I love that you created this resource, because it's great to have something you can do for different time slots, which are, as a mom, are so needed, because everything just gets, hectic when you might not know it. You might not be expecting it. Right.
Well, and yeah. And my thing too is that self-care shouldn't be something that you do separate from your life.
Right.
It can be
Exactly.
like you were saying, you have a meditation practice, right? So
Right.
that's a part of your life. It's scheduled in
Yeah.
every morning,
Right.
presumably.
Yep.
But in general, I feel like self-care and specifically dynamic self-care should be integrated into your life. It shouldn't be
Mm-hmm.
this thing that you have to like leave the house and go do and can only do when you can like leave the house, right?
Right.
It should be a part of the way that you live your life. So it means
Mm-hmm.
being mindful of how you're breathing when you're standing at the sink doing dishes,
Mm-hmm.
or moving your body in between folding, like things that you can do so that it actually gets done, right? Because if it's
Right.
not
Yeah.
integrated, it's another thing on your to-do list.
Right. You're like, oh, I gotta go to the whatever. Maybe you have to go to the spa to relax. Like, oh, I gotta schedule it. I gotta drive there. Or what, which
Right.
might not be open now, or who knows.
I mean,
But
who's
yeah.
ever felt stressed before going on vacation because of what you have to do to go on vacation?
Yeah, it's like you need a vacation from planning, and then you need a vacation when you get back. It's like you just like,
Exactly.
I'm taking 3 weeks next time.
Right.
Oh, great. Well, Krista, I have one last fun question for you, but first, let's talk about where people can find you. So, your website,
Is ChristaGowen.com.
Gowen.
Yes. And
Yes.
it's CHRISTA.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And then Instagram and Facebook.
Yep. So Instagram, my business name is Inside Out Healing. So you can
Mm-hmm.
find me at Inside Out Healing on Instagram. And then Facebook, you can find me there as well. I have a business page under that name. And then the Radical Mother Village.
Nice. Great. Okay. And I'll put all those in the show notes so everybody will be able to access those really easy. So if you're driving or listening, you don't need to write them down. You can look it up later. Okay. So if you had this unlimited budget right now, what would you do with the money and to make the biggest impacts and shifts on our planet?
For the planet or for myself? I feel like this is a trick question.
Well, I mean,
Well, if it's
it's your money. You can do what you want
That's
with
true.
it.
Okay. Well, and it's unlimited, so I can do both of
Right.
these.
Yeah, exactly.
First, I would end childhood hunger.
Mm.
I actually was a lunch lady by choice in a past life. It was actually the best job I've ever had. As much as I love
Mm.
doing the work I do now, childhood hunger is an issue that's near and dear to my heart.
Yeah.
Children that are hungry are inherently traumatized and then grow up to be traumatized adults. So
Right.
it just, that one really gets me. And
Mm.
then next, I'd buy 100 acres
Mm.
of my own land.
And then have a food farm?
I probably would, honestly. Yeah. I would have like a
Yeah.
yoga TRE studio on one half and the, market garden farm on the other half. That would actually be like heaven on earth to me.
Oh, nice. That sounds great. Well, there you go. I'll manifest it all for you.
Great.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you, Krista. It's been such a joy to have you on the show today and learn all about TRE and trauma. And we talked about so much great stuff. I know the listeners are going to be stoked to tune in.
Well, great. Thank you, Dr. Lulu. It's been fantastic to chat with you.